Hey everyone, welcome back to the 443 Security Simplified podcast. I'm your host, Corey Nachreiner, or should I say your guest host. And joining me today is...
Ryan Estes, and I'm part of the attestation team and do a lot of our ransomware work around here.
Awesome to have you, Ryan. On today's episode, we're covering the WatchGuard's Q1 Internet Security Report to share the malware and network attack trends we saw last quarter. However, unlike normal, I'm going to probably fly through the network attack trends so that we can instead focus on what Ryan's here for, which is diving deeper into our endpoint results. So without further ado, let's wade on into the threat landscape. So hey everyone, as mentioned, we are here to talk about WatchGuard's quarterly Internet Security Report for Q1 2025. If you've never read our ISR, as we call it, the Internet Security Report, it's basically a report talking about the threat landscape based on quantifiable trends that we see from our products. For instance, the products include our Firebox network security appliances, next generation firewalls or unified threat management appliances, which have at least 10 different security services, including many ways to catch malware network attacks. We basically talk about what we saw as far as different types of malware, how it was caught, and different network attacks. But we also have a section talking about our endpoint products, which is WatchGuard EPDR and Adaptive Defense 360. And as you know, Ryan is a guest on this episode. We're going to go into much more depth in our endpoint section. This ISR podcast goes with a webinar we do if you ever want to watch the webinar. But in that webinar, we basically give you highlights and never really go into the full detail of the endpoint report. So it's really exciting to have Ryan here to go into that in more detail. Just a reminder, as far as people that write the report, it was started by me and Mark probably almost 10 years ago. We were the primary writers at first, but we also have some co-authors, which include those from the WatchGuard Threat Labs team, which Ryan is one of them. Thanks for joining us again, Ryan. Happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So with that said, for this particular time, while me and Mark tend to talk about this report on the podcast and we kind of do the whole report in a normal style, this time I'm going to really quickly cover the trends for the Firebox feed, which is the network side of the report, maybe get a little color commentary from Ryan. But then we're going to dive in and look a lot closer at the endpoint section of the report, since we have the writer here and also the guy that maintains our ransomware tracker. So we can learn a lot about endpoint threats and ransomware. But diving right in, as I mentioned, the network section is covered by data we get from the Firebox feed, real data from live customer Fireboxes, at least those who opt in. And to remind you, it includes data from our 3 different anti-malware services. One is signature-based, good at catching the noise of the internet for malware. But the other 2, Intelligent AV and APT Blocker, are either AI, machine learning based, or behavioral analysis based for APT Blocker. And that becomes important when we talk about stats later on in the report. The network section also covers what we call network attacks, but it's really intrusion prevention. It's software exploits. So the common attacks that hit network servers or clients like web browsers and other clients that connect different network services. So we talk about what types of vulnerabilities are the attackers exploiting. And finally, we're not going to talk about it much in this podcast, but we also cover DNS Watch, which is a DNS firewall. It basically monitors all the domains your users are trying to go to. And if we know of known, compromised, drive-by download, phishing, or malicious domains of many types, we'll prevent them from getting there. And usually in this section of the report, we talk about which malicious domains are most popular. But let's together, Ryan, speed through the network part of this. And I'll start with, now remember, this is a network analysis. This isn't the endpoint malware trends, but one of the reasons we like looking at malware from the network side and the endpoint side is you tend to see different things. My theory on that is when we're seeing malware start on the network, and maybe you can comment on this, Ryan, normally you're not going to see the immediate final payload. It's not like the first thing they send you is a ransomware.exe file.
Almost never, actually.
Exactly. Yeah. So on the network side, I feel like we're usually catching scripts, malicious HTML, or things like droppers and loaders or stagers, things that are going to start malware. So one of the reasons we do this is because we can see those early droppers that are kind of preparing for the real malware. Whereas on your section, Ryan, sometimes we do actually get to the actual payload, right?
Yeah, and a lot of research you'll see like it's in a giant kill chain. So you see like it starts with this one, it goes to this one, this downloads this drops this, and so there's multiple steps. So that's multiple chances to catch malware too, not only at the network
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
at the endpoint too. So it's a defense in depth kind of thing.
The thing I like about the kill chain too is it doesn't even stop at the malware infecting you.
Hmm.
Even when the malware infects you, whatever type of malware it is, it might have to exfiltrate data or encrypt files, but don't give up because you can still catch the exfiltration kill chain. And even though you might have an infection, you can stop the bad stuff from happening. So, yeah, that by the way, Lockheed Martin has a cyber kill chain if you want to go into detail.
Hmm.
Later on, we're going to talk about, I think, stuff where we're looking at the MITRE attack framework. And while the attack framework is different, it's based on different parts of that kill chain with all the different tactics and techniques they use in different stages. So
It's based on
interesting.
real world observations. So what they actually have seen in the real world, they base these tactics and techniques on them. And that's a
Yeah.
part of our threat hunting section. So it's kind of actively pursuing these behaviors before they even happen.
I cannot wait to get to that. That's why you're here, so we can go in more in depth on that. But to get
Absolutely.
through just the highlights of the network section for malware, the big headline of this report is on the network side of things, we saw a huge increase in the volume of malware. Currently, we used to count these threats in total, but now we're actually counting them per firebox. So, on average, a single firebox blocked 4,204 malware attempts trying to get into the network. That is 171% increase quarter over quarter. So, almost triple, definitely more than double increase. Another interesting thing about this quarter is I mentioned we have different ways to catch malware. Gateway antivirus is the one that's signature based all the way to the right. But intelligent AV is our AI or ML. ML stands for machine learning service. And it had a huge increase in the amount of malware it detected, 323% increase quarter over quarter. So, really, not only did we see a big increase in the volume of malware that was stopped by the network, presumably before it got to the endpoint, if the endpoints were behind this, it was really our AI service that caught the majority of it. Our actual behavioral detection service was not needed very much this quarter. So, big highlight, huge increase in malware. Now, I know this is like asking for a little, we're kind of spoiling the surprise, but it was a little different in the endpoint section, right? I mean, as far as just total malware volume, what did it look like there, Ryan?
Total malware was down like
No,
20 or something percent. So, it's kind of
I think
bottomed out, if
22.
you
Yeah.
will. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was 2 quarters ago, it kind of spiked a lot. And then it's kind of like laid below, I guess you could say, if you do stocks or whatever, you could say kind of bottomed out. But you like unique threats are way up. So less malware, but more of it is unique. So more we haven't seen
That's
before,
interesting.
but
So
we're still
maybe more
blocking.
sophisticated. And in a second, we'll get into a network trend that talks about that too. Yeah, I can't wait to look at that. And maybe when we get there, we'll look at how it's changed quarter over quarter.
Yeah.
As far as the why did network malware go up in endpoint? Maybe not. I mean, sometimes, by the way, it makes sense if the network is stopping more malware before it gets to the endpoint. You would expect the endpoint have to detect less. But in this case, with so much remote work, I'm not sure if every endpoint is behind a firebox. So it's hard to really say. We don't have the data to know this, but one of the things we've noticed as a trend is more AI based tools in the malware community. We saw a lot of this malware improving on phishing and social engineering techniques, and we've seen tons of AI tools that are being attached to phishing frameworks. And for the longest time, maybe Ryan can talk about this, is as malware authors use things like packing and encrypting techniques to change it's still technically the same threat, but they've changed the digital signature of it. They've changed the binary enough that it's going to get past gateway antivirus. And when they do that a lot, that can lead to proactive services having to catch things like IAV, having to catch malware more. So it could be tools and even AI based techniques making it easier for attackers to evade, but we don't really know. Do you have any thoughts on what you think or about those tools?
Yeah. So Packers, well, I do a lot of malware analysis, right? So Packers are the thing that take the most time because you don't really know what's happening. Like you don't know import tables sometimes. So what functions is importing or anything. You don't know behaviors. So you have to unpack it just to see what it's kind of starting to do, and that takes a lot of time. So it actually takes the
For a
most time to do
researcher.
practice. Yeah, exactly. And so those do make it past like the network evasion and stuff like that. But that's the most important part about defense in depth is that you have like the hash detecting the hash. If it doesn't, machine learning AI stuff, behavioral analysis will detect it. And then once you get on the endpoint, it does it again. So hash
Yes. Same
analysis.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's multiple defense in depths on top
Yeah.
of each other. But yeah, packing is an obfuscation. I see a lot of obfuscation, like scripts will do it because I mean, if you see a script that downloads a file that's from like an IP address that looks wonky, I mean, you're going to assume that's malware, and these
Absolutely.
machine learning type tools will detect the same thing. So
And it
yeah,
gets complex, but since we have you, a malware researcher here, I mean, when you're talking about import tables and stuff, a lot of people may not realize that a lot of malware is portable executable files, and they have a very standard layout.
mm,
And obfuscation, like packing, is taking a you know you have to understand how portable executable files are built. You
yeah,
have to play with stubs, and there's lots of detailed stuff that you, as the malware analyst, it's all obfuscation, really. Even cryptors that do encryption in a PE,
mm,
everything you need to decrypt the file has to be in the PE file, right? I mean, at the end of the day,
yes,
it's a kind of puzzle that a malware analyst can eventually figure out to see the final payload. But
yep.
there, just know there's a lot of detail in analyzing portable executable files and all the little tricks they use to obfuscate them and thus change the digital footprint of the file.
Yeah, if you get into malware analysis, one of the first things you learn is the structure of a PE header and like how files are structured. So you can dissect it in reverse, like saying, okay, this is the header points here, and this should point here, and this is like the entry point, and just to know how files work. Because if they do alter it, which they do, you'll know that it's altered, and you know what to look for. So you can, I
Yeah,
mean, you
very
can.
cool stuff.
It looks like just hieroglyphics when you're first starting. You're like, I have no idea what I'm looking at. But once you understand structures, and this is geared towards Windows, by the way, PE is for Windows specifically. So
Absolutely.
if you get into like Linux and Mac, it's a whole different ballgame. But yeah, that's like one of the first things you learn because malware is almost always geared towards Windows because that's what most people use. So yeah, it's
Now, as
interesting stuff.
complex as this sounds, though, there's underground tools that make it a push button. Like the person that makes a packer, a new packer or crypter, they need to understand a PE as much as you. But once they've created a tool, they can sell it to an idiot and they just basically have to pick a file and press a button and it will do the magic for them. So the
Yeah,
underground has kind of lowered the bar, the technical bar. So nowadays, even unskilled people that at least spend money on these can get some evasion capability without understanding the details that you do.
yeah, it goes both ways though. Like they create tools that make it easier, but there's also researchers on my side that create tools that make it a lot easier to analyze stuff like a
Absolutely.
disassembler and stuff like that. Like if you didn't have that, it'd be so almost
Yeah, it'd be
impossible,
hard.
right? It'd be so difficult.
Cool. We're already diving into the details, but let's get quickly the endpoint
Yeah,
section.
but
So, going back to the report for the network section, besides the highlights of malware volume increasing, and you can see by AI catching a lot of it, sophistication and evasion has increased too, similar to the endpoint. More new unique variants. The other stat we have, we call the 0-day malware stat. I emphasize the word malware because our community uses 0-day most often to talk about unpatched software exploits or newly developed vulnerabilities in software. So a 0-day exploit is basically a flaw that's been found that hasn't been patched on day one or on the first, like never before. Whereas when we say 0-day malware, what we mean here is malware that has a signature is known. So if it requires some sort of proactive analysis, whether it be AI based or behavioral, as Ryan was mentioning with the stages of getting to behavioral, it doesn't matter how someone packs at portable executable. When it runs, it has to do something bad in order to succeed, and behavioral analysis will always catch it. So when we have this 0-day malware number, it's showing you the difference between if you're just using a legacy antivirus solution that's primarily signatures, hashes, maybe some heuristics, versus a solution that leverages more machine learning, AI capabilities, behavioral analysis in the cloud. What's the difference? How much will signature based catch versus the other? And this quarter, we had a big increase in what we call zero-day malware, meaning the malware that requires heavier, more proactive analysis to catch it day one versus signature-based. You can see it's increased to 78%. So over three-fourths of malware required our more advanced malware services to catch it. And that's just for normal traffic. Most web traffic is encrypted, it's HTTPS. When we look inside the malware that was sent over HTTPS channels, that zero-day number jumps up to 87%. So almost all, 9/10 of malware required more than just signatures to catch. So to us, that suggests attackers are paying more attention to doing some of the evasion and sophistication tactics to get past normal AV that me and Ryan were just talking about. So big increase in sophistication. Just for some history, for the past year, this number has dropped for us. It used to be where it was regularly over 50%, but over the last year, we've seen it like under 50%, sometimes even in the 20s. So it popping back up all the way to 78% was a big change in the network section. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but in our network malware report, we go through the top malware by volume. We go through the top widespread malware, meaning the malware that touches most devices versus maybe touching one device multiple times. We go over the top malware by encrypted channels. And I'm not going to cover all that. I'm just going to talk about malware by volume. Here you can see our top 10 list. There's some botnets. One is an IoT botnet, Mirai, that seems to come back. There's also something in the 11th spot that's also Mirai related. So we're seeing a continuation of Linux malware showing up in the top 10, including things that affect IoT devices and install botnets. But the only one I want to highlight in the network section, I'll switch to the report really quickly so you can see there, is one called Trojan Agent.fzpi. So this was the dropper you saw right at the top of the report. This dropper has an interesting way to arrive. So basically, it's an HTML-based dropper. When you will get you get an email that has this HTML pop-up that looks like it's coming from Adobe, asking you to update something, Adobe Acrobat. But if you actually do that, you're going to get a zip file. So first of all, if you see a pop-up or get an email that has this kind of Adobe thing, you should be immediately suspicious. It should be pretty easy to tell it's not really coming from Acrobat. But then if it's going to have you download a zip file, that's really weird. The zip file was also password protected. And you can see in this email that it actually has the password in the thing trying to get you. Like as soon as you get an email asking you to enter a password to unencrypt a zip file, Ryan's laughing because don't do that. It's not a good idea.
Well, I see
If
it's a
you were,
lot.
it happens a ton. If you actually do unzip that, it contains multiple files. It contains the ISO file, which is kind of like an image, the same type of image you might have burned to a CD, but basically it's a little image of files inside it. It has a dynamic link library, and it has a shortcut, and it also has the calculator app. And the reason is basically if you interact with this, with the shortcut, it's going to try to use calculator to do some bad stuff. If you don't have calculator on your computer, it's using that calc file to put it there. But long story short, if you actually follow this all along the path, it's going to download an additional payload. I think this one was Qbot, which is a very popular and kind of old school bot, but just an example of the type of threat that's the most common. HTML emails with zip files. There's a lot there for your users to catch before we even have to. But that was one of the biggest threats, or the biggest malware threat we saw in the network section.
Yeah, I see those a lot. That specific Adobe window, like when I analyze those, I know right away. Especially because I'll pull up Wireshark when I run it, and it'll immediately make a call to IP info, which is what a lot of attackers use to get your IP address and API call. And so I see that right away, and I'm like, malware. Immediately, I don't have to do anything else.
It's crazy. What's crazy is it works. Like the reason you see it a lot is maybe it's only 1% of 1%, but if you're spamming that email to tens of millions, if not millions of people, there's still folks that must do it. Otherwise, why the heck? But yeah, to you especially analyzing malware, but even to me that just sees it on a one-off basis, it's like 101.
Yeah.
And we also see ones that leverage M365 apps and stuff too. So Word documents with passwords, those are also weird.
Yeah, I actually think that's interesting, the coin miners up there, that they're so high in count, because I don't
Because
see
it
those
was
at
lower for
all.
you.
It's always
Yeah.
low. I actually took it off the endpoint section for a few quarters because I was like, there's really nothing to report on. The numbers are so low. And the
I
reason
suspect it could be target. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to
The
say, the
reason?
reason I suspect is because personally, when I see coin miners analyzing, they're usually bundled with other stealers. So I just
Hmm.
label them as an information stealer usually, or like it's usually bundled with like a dropper. And, we already talked about that, but I usually never label them coin miners because there's not very many just coin miners that just, use your machine to steal cryptocurrency type stuff, like to leverage
It
your
feels like an
hardware.
additional thing. Like if I'm a threat actor that has a general piece of malware, a Trojan or botnet on your computer, it's almost like it's a sitting thing where I can load just about anything to monetize. So like the first thing I might do is just have an info stealer where I'm stealing all your keys, because one way I can monetize is piracy using your keys.
Yeah.
Then I might load a coin miner. It's not going to make me a lot of money, especially if you discover it. But if I'm doing that in a botnet of hundred thousands of computers, it will monetize a little bit more. But then at the end of the day, maybe I find out you're a company. Then I load a ransomware payload, and that's the final stage. So I don't know if you agree, but I think some of the generic Trojans and botnets, they're like the placeholder. This is my way of sitting with a back door so I can add whatever over time to monetize. And what you're saying is basically coin miners, you would expect them to be secondary or third payloads, not the first thing.
Yeah, bundled with other like cryptocurrency
Yeah.
wallet key stealers, or I mean, if you're already on an endpoint and you can have a payload with a coin miner, you should be able to do more. But
Yeah, you can do a whole lot. I wonder if
interesting.
it's just
Go
an automated one. Like if you're attacking a Linux server in particular and you
ahead.
have a backdoor on it and you're planning on going to find out what you can get from it later, it still is easy to automate it. Just install that coin miner right away so that it can do stuff while you're waiting. I
Yeah,
don't know.
and some of them are actually legitimately coin miners. Like there
Yeah.
are coin miners exist. Like you have to mine cryptocurrency. That's how you get some of them. And so those are usually pups. And so it's because you don't
Yeah.
know if you don't want them or
In other
not.
words, it's the same coin miner someone would put on their own computer. The only difference is they're hiding it in some way so that you don't realize it's running, and the coin is mining to their hash, not
Yeah,
their crypto wallet, not yours.
it's not on behalf of someone else, which is
Yeah.
interesting. I say that because one of the top, or two of the top 10 malware in the endpoint section, getting ahead of myself, sorry, was I think Red Canary did research on a Tangerine Turkey campaign, which is what they
Oh,
called it.
cool.
And it was like a USB dropper, like a USB device you plug in, and it led to like a
Yeah.
downloader, and it did I think it was an XMR, which is Monero, coin miner at the end of it. So it did
Huh.
make the top 10 in the endpoint this section, which is rare, but Tangerine
You
Turkey is
have
what it's
seen
called.
you have seen coin miners. I do remember they have not been big in the endpoint report, but they did go up like years ago, if I remember, for a certain period of time.
Yeah, it usually is correlated with like the overall cryptocurrency landscape, which right now is pretty hot, to be honest. I think the
Yeah.
market cap of that's like the highest it's ever been. So it usually correlates with, hey, crypto's popular right now, everyone's making money on it, so let's steal it. I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's easy. I think bad guys always go for lowest hanging fruit.
Yep.
Finishing off real quick, the last section in the Firebox feed I want to talk about is the network attack section. So this is IPS, but I can cover this in 1 minute because I think it's boring this quarter. Basically, we saw 93 network exploits per Firebox in Q1. That's a huge 1% increase. Last quarter, we saw 92. This quarter, we saw 93. So really it stayed stagnant, nothing really new. And by the way, it also went down. I don't have a slide for it, but we do count the unique exploits used. So of all the different software vulnerabilities, are they using lots of different ones or just a few common ones? The amount of unique went down, so it was less exploits and not really much change. We do also, as you can see, have a top 10 network attacks. So these are the most common exploits. This also remained pretty much uninteresting because, as you might imagine, the theme of the top 10 in the network attacks has been web application vulnerabilities. For those that don't know, they're basically attacks targeting websites, web applications of any sort, whether it's a website, a management front end. And there's generic web application attacks. There's certainly vulnerabilities in like specific frameworks. Like maybe IIS will have a vulnerability on its help page, which is a specific vulnerability. But there's all kinds of ways someone can just attack your custom web app if you have bad coding, like SQL injection. Maybe you don't have settings correctly, so they can do web directory traversal and get to other directories. There's all kinds of different vulnerabilities. So what we see in the network top 10 is usually these generic threats. Like you can see there's multiple web directory traversals. These are generic signatures just to look for web application attacks that are trying to get into directories they shouldn't have access to. We do see some known attacks like HA proxy and a proxy logon, which are very old now. One is, I think, 4 years old. The other one is 2 years old. But they were big Microsoft-based vulnerabilities in Exchange's web services. They still are making our list, although hopefully you've patched them by now. And there's one, maybe even Ryan is familiar with. If you're exploiting a vulnerability over the web, but maybe it's a memory, it could be any sort of memory corruption vulnerability associated with a website. This gets very complicated, but exploiting a flaw in software just gives you control over a very specific place in memory. Mm-hmm. To actually turn that into doing something bad, executing code, you, the attacker, using debuggers like Ryan was talking about, have to figure out how to get to EIP, or the stack pointer, because the stack pointer is when you have control of what executes next. So one of the interesting things you see is the shell NOP sled. NOP is machine language for no operation. Once a bad guy has a memory corruption flaw, he has a place where he can put a instruction somewhere in memory. His next job, or her next job, is to get to the stack pointer. And sometimes once you've figured out where that is, you'll just you put a lot of no operations so that the CPU just cycles until the stack pointer gets to where you want it, where you then have the malicious code you have. But long story short, all web-based threats, mostly generic or mostly old, so not all that interesting. So let's get to it, Ryan. What I really do want to get to with you, the author of the endpoint section, is the endpoint thread. So I'm going to just start asking questions and let you fill in the stuff. You gave a little hint of this, but you can talk about the past few years. But let's start with just malware volume. What did you see there?
So I just want to start out and say that the first slide you showed when you said that this data is anonymized and opt-in, I think that's important to show or highlight, because everything we've highlighted is for those that opt in to share the data. So this isn't all encompassing. This is just kind of what
it represents, a small portion.
It's a subset and it's anonymous. Yeah. So what are we talking about? Total threats or total malware threats?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was down 20%. Like I said, it kind of bottomed out because it kind of looks flat. I mean, minus 20% is significant, but it relatively, because when you look at Q3 of 2024, it went up like 450K, which is way
if our
crazy.
Viewers see the graph, that was the interesting part. Like, to be honest, it started the year at 100K-ish, and now it's below that, so it's still dropped. But the last 2 quarters haven't been that different. But in Q1, it shot the heck up. It was the headline of our report then.
Yeah, Q3, yeah.
Do you know, just to remind you, listeners, is we have the data of the threats we detect in these volume numbers. We don't always have the data for why the trends are changing, though. We make educated hypotheses based on our experience, but we don't know. So having put that caveat, Ryan, do you remember in Q2, why we thought we saw malware spike in that way?
I think I assumed that there was just a lot of widespread campaigns that were just spamming. I don't remember the exact reason. 2 quarters ago is so long ago, but it just seemed like a one-off that was almost bizarre. And I think I inquired about our team on, why I thought this was, or what they saw, because they share the data with me and I post it, And it was all just hypothesis and educated guesses, because it was the only one-off quarter that I've seen. It's definitely the highest quarter we've seen since we've started tracking the data. So
things we may not know in the background is I sometimes think malware and spamming and all that is associated with infrastructure that has to do with them also owning computers. Because if I'm a bad guy, I may not have a botnet, but I can spend a couple months building a botnet of 1,000 computers or 100,000 computers. Now, what do I do with that? I often will use that as my infrastructure, my proxy, to start spamming malware. So I could imagine if some new actor suddenly built a botnet, then they set up a spamming infrastructure. Then right after that happens, bam, they start leveraging their new botnet infrastructure to spam the world with malicious emails that thus, start directing people to malware downloads, and you could spike that. And then one day, an authority, something can happen where their botnet gets taken down or they lose control of it, and bam, it disappears the next day. So this is pure speculation, but being that usually malicious actors are using maliciously acquired resources in their campaigns, I would guess it could just have to do with someone getting a big botnet set up and starting a campaign, like you say, and either stopping the campaign for a period of time because they got spooked, or later having their infrastructure removed by authorities and thus losing the power to do it until
I
they
remember
rebuild.
I remember Qbot was taken down a few quarters ago. I don't know if that was around the same time, but that was used by Black Basta a lot, and it kind of
Yeah.
messed up their whole operation too. So I think that
Yeah.
might coincide with that. But it's also important to note that total malware threats is not all the malware threats. It's unique total malware threats. So, like for example, 420,000 in Q3, that's 420,000 unique threats. This isn't like the same one over and over again. So,
Gotcha.
so they're all
The
different
the
hash.
other thing to note too, by the way, is this isn't for you. Also do these numbers per 100,000 machines, if I understand right.
That's the
So
next one.
is okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
So
that's why
let's
the
get
number's
to
so
the next
small.
one, which is the more interesting one, which might mean more evasive malware. Talk about the new unique threats in Q1.
Yeah, same thing. It's this is a subset of the number, so it's not all. And it went up what is that like 700%, like 7 times, 8 times. So it way up. But again, these are unique threats that we've never seen before. So it's total malware, but the only difference is these are all unique that we have never seen. So new
When we
hashes,
say
stuff like that.
unique threats, can we is it could they be unique in that they have been packed or crypted, or are
If
they
you, it's a hash.
it's so
So if
gotcha.
you can
So
change
it
one
really
letter
is
in
a
the
new
malware
hash.
table,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's a brand new
And
hash.
this going up would also explain why zero-day malware goes up, because the signatures for the hash before would stop working.
Yeah. So if you send like a malware spam campaign and you send unique spam, like just tweaked a little bit to the person, every single one's going to be a new threat at that point. It's unique. So yeah, there's been a ton of new ones. That's probably I was talked about earlier. Probably because they're obfuscating more, and as personally, I see more sophistication as time goes on because I suspect that threat actors are assuming that there's more, detection response devices on endpoints and stuff like that. So they have to assume that they have to obfuscate to get past, or it's going to be caught immediately. Just my assumption, though.
Makes sense for sure. Uh, and we'll probably dive into the report to catch sections we don't talk about too in the endpoint. But before we do, one I'm always interested in is that this is once it's past the network, by the way. But once you're past the network defense, we have something that goes over the top attack vectors for how the malware is. It's almost like the root cause of the malware being first delivered on the endpoint. And I remember, like, it seems like multiple years where scripts were anywhere from 80 to 90%. And by scripts, I mean most malware seem to start with PowerShell or Visual Basic or JavaScript. And more importantly, when we looked at the details of those three, it was almost like 90% of malware was scripts and 90% of the scripts were PowerShell.
Yeah,
So that
exactly.
was a story we told for a long time. And during that time, the only other thing that ever showed up always felt like it was Windows, which, and by that we essentially mean Windows binaries.
Mm-hmm.
And these are legitimate Windows files, but once you get some privilege on a computer, you can use Windows binaries for malicious activities, living off the land attacks.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have a section in the report where we go over lolbast, showing the most common Windows executables that threat actors leverage too. So
Yep.
to me, that story always talked about, to me, you combine Windows binaries and scripts. That's like living off the land techniques to get malware, because you're trying to use built-in utilities to do something bad before you even have loaded some new bad file. But that has changed. Scripts went down a lot. Tell me about this quarter.
Yeah, if you read the endpoint section, which it's long, I understand if you don't. PowerShell kind of rules the kingdom. It's almost always the same stories. 90% of the scripts are PowerShell, and scripts are 90%, like you kind of said. So it's just always PowerShell. And that's because PowerShell is native to Windows, so everyone can use it. It's a scripting language, so they have a lot of capabilities
It's in
within
its
Windows.
name, right? It's
Yeah,
powerful. Like
yeah,
I always say, if you have an admin credential or even a local system, PowerShell can do anything the computer can do. So it's
yeah,
literally a malware actor can do anything a user could do on their own computer in the background with
yeah,
PowerShell. Yeah.
yeah. So I've expanded this section a lot. It used to be just like Office. If you could pop that window back up, I was
Yeah, we'll get to
trying
the
to.
next one if you like. Yeah.
No, okay, yeah. It used to be Acrobat, browsers, Office, which is now Microsoft 365, scripts, and Windows. And I've been getting increasing amount of data, so I've been able to expand on this. And so I've added coding software, database software, remote access software, and other, which is literally just everything else that doesn't fit into a category. So it could be, you name it, just third party
The ones
applications.
you did mention remote apps in there too. You have a separate section for remote access, but in other, the
Yep.
ones you seem to point out are like KMS. Like I hope I'm saying it right, but KMS is uh, yeah, you're
Licensing
talking about
activation tools.
piracy servers essentially. They're tools, underground tools that are made to, now that Windows activates itself online, you can have a fake server to get a activated copy of Windows, but those piracy apps tend to come with bad surprises in them. It sounds like.
Yeah, they're either use like a keygen, license
Yeah,
activator, or it attempts to be that, like it
yeah.
perceives to be that, and just does like a download on the back end or something. But actually, those are rarely malware in my from what I've seen. They
Well,
usually
that's
are
good.
just auto KMS.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen obviously they exist, but I personally, I mean, there's a ton of other analysts.
So we might have them in our malware thing, but it's more as a pirated app than really a threat.
Yeah, auto KMSs are pups, so potentially unwanted programs. So if you see it as a malware auto KMS, that means there is something to it. But if it's a pup, pups are pups. They're not malware, explicitly not malware, and explicitly not goodware. So
Yeah,
they're like in the gray area. But more importantly, they're explicitly not malware. So if something is malicious within a pup, it's malware. It's not a
gotcha.
pup anymore. But yeah, going back to this data here, coding software is basically like Python, Java, like anything that you would use
I'm
to
going to
write
switch to
code.
another window that might just help you too. So
Yes, yes,
here
it
you're
does.
actually seeing some of the internal detail of what Ryan's talking about.
Yeah, so browsers usually is driven by the big three, which is Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Edge, Internet Explorer, same thing. Uh,
Do you? By the way, I now consider it used to be Chrome, Internet Explorer, and Firefox. I now consider Chrome and Edge Chrome because isn't Edge like Chromium based? So now it's more like Chrome than it is like the previous actual Internet Explorer.
yeah, it's based on the process that invokes the alert. So if Edge did, and then Edge is native to Windows, so not a lot of people actually go through the process of downloading another browser. So they'll just use Edge. So I'm surprised I actually don't see Safari more. It just means you don't have a lot of Mac users, I guess.
Yeah.
But Brave, I've seen tick up a little bit, and that coincides with the crypto usage because it's a cryptocurrency privacy one. And for the first time, I saw what was it like Wave and WaterFox or something like that. I never heard of them. I had to look them up, and those are just more like privacy third-party browsers. But it's usually Chrome leads the way, and sometimes it's Firefox, and then Edge, of course, is always there. And then remote access tools is kind of exactly what they sound like. It's any tool that used to remote into a system. And these are heavily abused by attackers because obviously they allow remote access to a
Yeah, yeah,
system.
yeah. They're
So
exactly what they want.
exactly, it's a whole package deal. Like, hey, everything I wanted. So that's kind of like self-explanatory, really. And log me in is usually the driver of that one.
Oops, sorry.
Oh no! I added database recently, and this is usually driven by SQL stuff, and these are all SQL. I usually see some Mongo in there and some no SQL stuff, but I did not this quarter at all, which is kind of surprising. But yeah, it's mostly just Postgres and SQL Server and Access, which are Microsoft built-in tools. Scripts, we kind of talked about lots. The big bar you see, that's PowerShell, and that drives it all. And the second one is usually
But
Visual
Visual
Basic.
Basic is pretty big, and I assume a
Yeah,
lot of Office threats will have some heavy malicious Visual Basic before they spawn PowerShell.
yeah, a lot of macro based
Yeah.
Office files in there. And Auto IT, I actually see the most personally, and those are always flagged. Especially they come to my queue a lot because anytime there's an auto IT script, it's just like,
One note, by
oh,
the way, when Ryan says he sees in our endpoint service, we have a zero trust application service, which means if you have us put in lock mode, our software, you should never see malware because when it hits our endpoint, we have a lot of endpoint based capabilities to detect malware, some local signatures, heuristics, looking for exploits like memory injection and stuff, looking for indicators of attack. But if there's any file that we're not 100% sure if it's good or bad, we send it to a cloud service. And that cloud service does a lot of things. It starts by going to a huge freaking database of literally billions of goodware. Like, think signatures on freaking steroids, where we have all the goodware and badware we've ever known for 30 years of the company we acquired being in existence. Then it goes through a whole bunch of machine learning and AI algorithms to see if there's anything. It goes through some behavioral analysis. But at the end of the day, I think it's something like 98.98% of threats that get up to our cloud are automated stuff that I'm talking about. We'll decide if it's good or bad. But then there's this tiny bit of 0.02% where we still haven't found it out for sure. And bam, that goes to a human analyst. So when you say what you see the most,
mhm.
auto IT may not be the most common thing for all the malware, but when auto IT sounds like it's something that's evading all that automated analysis and is coming to actual humans, to you to analyze the most. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there's a
Ish?
small
Yeah.
section in the endpoint section that is called Defense in Depth. It's one of the first ones, and I highlight all the architecture and technologies we use in a defense in depth format, kind of like layer it. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you get like the hashes first, like those are the easy ones. Like, hey, we've seen this hash, it's this. Then like behavioral machine learning, we have digital signatures is another one. So we check the
Bear with
signature
me.
of it.
I'm going to get there. Keep
Yeah, go ahead.
talking.
And then the cloud, like you just talked about, and then I forget there was one more, but then yeah, the last one is attestation team, which those are usually the files that are always the most suspicious. Like we don't know if it's explicitly goodware or malware; it just does kind of suspicious behaviors. Yeah, so like there at the manual attestation, it would be the ones that go to the analysts, and this is kind of in order. So endpoint detection is kind of like the first line of defense. Pandas 8360. These are defined rules, which are kind of like threat hunting rules, like behavior. It's kind of like behavioral analysis a little bit, but they're more defined. Digital signatures, like I said, the behavioral catches the most because it's basically running the file in a sandbox and seeing what it's doing. Same with the cloud, like you just described. And then the last step is the manual attestation, which is we determine a human what happens, and so we'll do our own analysis, and we have a whole
Yep.
team that does that, and I'm part of that team. So yeah, when I
By the way,
say
with the zero trust attestation, if you're in that hardened mode, we're not going to release the file to your user until it's done. And we tend to have a SL, like all of the automated things happen very, very quickly. If it gets to a human person, like Ryan, we have a 4 hour SLA, even though I know you guys probably beat that SLA a lot. But
Mhm.
just to share the power of it, if you have that on, at the end of the day, it's either going, when we say it's good, it's going to be good. And if we say it's bad, it's going to be bad because if we don't give up until a human has actually looked at it. So it's really powerful for blocking malware.
Yeah. And so when I say like I've seen auto IT scripts, these are ones that end up in like my queue that I end up analyzing a lot. And like I said, auto IT scripts are suspicious because a lot of attackers use them, especially recently. I've seen a ton, a few a week at least, that are just obfuscated auto IT scripts. And there's a tool made by, I think it's FireEye, that just extracts it right away in plain text so I can see the script and determine right away.
Much
But
easier to figure out if it's bad.
they're almost the easiest to do, to be honest. .NET
Yeah.
is pretty easy. Auto IT is probably the easiest, and then plain scripts like PowerShell and shortcuts, LNKs are pretty easy because those all I don't have to do any like disassembling. It's just hey, here's the script. What does it do? Is it obfuscated? Does it look wonky? Does it download a file? Does it drop something? Things like that. So the
We're
most
running low
thing.
on time, but I do want
Oh
to
yeah.
ask you a few more things. While we're here in this section, you haven't covered the Microsoft vector yet. I'll go straight to a question. Like I would assume, if I'm just thinking, obviously Microsoft document threats exist, and I would, I in my mind think of it usually as document, some sort of document. I would have just assumed Word would be the most common, Excel would be
Mhm.
second, and everything else would be under.
Me too.
But in this, you have something called Office Malicious and OneNote, and Office
Miscellaneous.
Miscellaneous,
Yeah.
I should say. Office Miscellaneous. I wonder, is that just a vulnerability that could be in all of these document types? Meaning, it still could be in a Word file, or tell me why you think OneNote and Office Miscellaneous are so high.
So OneNote, that's a good question. The Office Miscellaneous those are like helper files, or like, for example, if you download like Office, like the executable to download all the applications, that would be a miscellaneous because it's not one of those. It's kind of like an other. For example,
Yeah.
it's all like the helper files that go with Excel or like the Office
So
suite.
the trigger to these helper files could still, like at the end of the day, what I'm getting in an email still may be a Word document, but the Word
Mhm.
document contains some sort of thing that's looking at a helper file, or is it actually a .help file that you would get as the threat?
It could be part of them. I don't have the telemetry to determine what it's going to be. I just have to go off the kind of what it is, the date of the process name. And a lot of
I
those are
see.
actually like Office based executables that facilitate all the other applications.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
like, because that's what
Cool.
Microsoft Office does nowadays. They have Microsoft 365 that kind of has a whole suite of products.
Yeah. 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 Cool. So interesting to know. Since we're here, I'm going to go through some sections we don't talk about. By the way, you were talking about crypto miner detections. You do have a section for it. People
It's brought
watching
back.
the YouTube version of this can see that actually we are seeing a little more crypto miners at the end of last year and beginning of this year compared to Q2 and Q3 of last year. So they're up a bit, but I think these numbers are still quite low if you looked many
And
years
those
back.
are with those appearing on the top 10 malware. The Tangerine Turkey was part of that, so that's why that number's high. And last quarter was also a coin miner on a top 10. Kind of drives those
Cool.
numbers.
Awesome. So you talked about threat hunting. One of the things we look at, like threat hunting, is like a more advanced way of looking for indicators of attack. Indicators of compromise are things like known bad files, like a hash that we know this is bad.
Mm.
Indicators of attack don't necessarily for sure mean something is being happening for a malicious reason, but when you start to add them up, and depending on which indicator it is, it could be heavily suspicious. We talked about the MITRE ATT&CK framework being a framework that shows the entire kill chain and what the different techniques and tactics are in between them. But tell me a little bit about what happened in the threat hunting section with these attacks.
Yeah, like you kind of pointed out that the numbers are high, like in the millions, because they are indicators. And I would argue that most of these are not malicious because they are, like, for example, the second one, TA002, the 1059.01, whatever, the second ranking one, it's a PowerShell script. So anytime a PowerShell is executed, I'm assuming it triggers another alert. So most of those are not going to be, like, if I pulled up PowerShell right now and start writing stuff and execute it, it would probably throw a threat hunting alert.
One of the
It's when you
reasons I
come,
believe our product does this is external companies that judge how good an endpoint product are want you to log every MITRE tactic. So the point is, every time PowerShell runs, it's not bad. Like PowerShell is a very common tool that normal administrators use, and I would assume 90% of PowerShell is probably internal administrators. But as a company, because endpoint people that monitor endpoint companies, like the testing organizations, want to see that you can trigger on all the MITRE stuff. So I think we have these triggers to have the logs for it. But I will say we have capabilities to make you know, like we kind of weight indicators of attack with other things like our contextual engine. Like we don't assume every time PowerShell runs it's bad, but we do have a contextual engine that will look for other indicators within the PowerShell to say it's bad. Is that correct?
yeah, I was going to say that telemetry is the most important thing here. It's if you see that in conjunction with other stuff,
Yes.
then that's when you start kind of doing the threat hunting. Like, hey, I've seen PowerShell mixed with like discovery and then a command and control and then encrypted files like stuff. And they're like, okay, something's going on here.
So this is the kind of thing, if you actually had a SOC with detection and response, we have all these MITRE like indicators of attack so that you can go later see, oh, this indicator of attack isn't as simple as PowerShell. It might be more suspicious, but what other things can I see that this IP or this user did at the exact same time? And if you see 20 other indicators of attack too, associated with the first one that triggered you to investigate, that's when you might start as a threat hunter, realizing that, oh, this isn't just normal, this is weird.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Basically right?
pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, a lot of small to medium businesses don't have the time and SOC and expertise to do that, which is why WatchGuard has an MDR service. So we can have our people threat hunt for you. So whether you're a partner or customer, just know that's something we can do. I do find this interesting. I guess not knowing which one of these are truly malicious versus which one are normal. It's hard to say. Things like disk content wipe seem pretty. There are probably some of these that, as a person monitoring the system, you'd want to pay more attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other learnings you got from this section, or?
No, I don't do a lot of. I'm not on the threat hunting team, so I just get like the data and kind of infer based on the endpoint stuff. So a lot of this is, basically just data and me inferring on it. But
Cool.
yeah.
With just another few minutes, let's talk about ransomware and call it a day. What did you see in ransomware?
So the ransomware landscape number is the WatchGuard specific number. And the reason it was high last quarter is because we had multiple black box attacks that were blocked on the endpoint, where we did not see that this quarter, although there was a termite sample that ended up on the top 10, which it was kind of surprising that it was on the top 10 and it was still low. So that means if you kind of exclude the termite one, the numbers were pretty low this quarter.
And when you're saying termite, some people will say actual ransomware, like the malware variant with like CryptoWall or Tesla Crypt. When you say termite, that's more the group than the and Black Basta is the group more than or do we now name the malware termite as well?
They're usually interchangeable now. So unless they specifically, there's some groups like affiliates and stuff that'll use different encryptors, but usually when I say like termite ransomware group and termite ransomware, it's
Same
the
thing.
group Yeah.
Good to know. Any big changes in these extortion groups?
Not really. There's a couple like one-off groups. There was GD LockerSec was listed twice. We gotta fix that. I didn't catch that. Sorry. Yeah, that was one of the one-off groups that like they posted one and then they immediately went away. So they went up through the trouble of making a whole new data leak site, posted like one or two victims, and then said, "See ya, peace
That's
out."
weird.
Yeah, another one that's interesting, I think, was FunkSec. I think they were the first one to do like AI-based chatbot stuff. I talked to Mark about this, I think, on the last podcast I was on. Bloody's an interesting group. They were the one I always talk to people about that talked about hiring a hitman. So they're the reason.
Yeah, I remember that one.
They're the reason for the hitman extortion type on the tracker. Besides that, just kind of the same old stuff. I think one more highlights RA Lord on there, which is they've rebranded multiple times now. They were like RA World, then RA Group, then RA Lord, and now they went to Nova. They're a group called Nova now. So if you see that on the tracker, it's the same group.
I assume, but tell me what you think, that sometimes these namings, like these groups, are being chased by authorities now. They public while they may be on onion networks, although sometimes they're on clear internet too.
Yep.
They want to publicly post when they get people because it's part of their extortion, is letting the world and press know. But because of that, they're also chased by authorities and their sites are taken down. So I guess my question is, do you think the new names and the new groups popping up all the time, do you think they're really just new groups, or are they groups that are like running from the authorities? They pop up for a while, then the authorities get interested in that group, then they kind of abandon that page and pop up as a new one somewhere else. Do you have a theory?
So, yeah, some are, and some we know are based on like, how they do ransom notes and like encryptor, like doing a technical analysis. Like the encryptor has the same algorithm to encrypt files and stuff like that. You kind of determine that. And there was I don't know if you remember a few years ago, a group called Hive that got taken down by FBI.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Pretty big deal. They rebranded to another group, and they just rebranded again to World Leaks. I think they were Hunters International, and then they just stopped, and now they're World Leaks. And a lot of these are actually like the old Conti group, which kind of branched off into like Black Basta. Like Basta is one of the groups. And then, so it's a lot of the same people that do kind of like mix
It may
commingling
not
stuff like
not be
that.
as interested to the defenders because, like, the average person at home doesn't necessarily, you can't change a security control. But to people like us, it is interesting to follow the actual individual groups where they are in the world and how the authorities are getting to them. With that
Yep.
said, just in like 60 seconds,
Got it.
you also at the end talk about like law enforcement actions against ransomware or even notable breaches
Mhm.
due to ransomware. Are there any here you think are important? Now, you've mentioned some of the rebrands
Yep,
before and
there's one
stuff
right
like
there.
that. Yeah.
Scroll up just one second. Yeah, there was two law enforcement actions. Like 8base got taken down by law enforcement from multiple countries. That was a pretty big deal. They were around for a few years. Lockbit has taken a real big hit. I think they're still active in some capacity, but there's been so many leaks of like internal groups and
They've been
affiliates.
taken down before. That's the
Yeah,
group that keeps on reborn. Like when authorities say they take it down, it's usually the infrastructure and maybe sometimes a few actors, but the group
yeah.
seems to persist.
Yeah, and the Black Basta, their internal kind of workings got leaked by a person named Exploit Whispers, or that was the channel name. And that actually happened today again
Yeah.
too. Someone just released the chat logs of Medusa Group, so I've actually been looking into that a little bit.
No honor among thieves, which is actually good for the security practitioners.
Yeah, it's great stuff. um,
Cool.
and then I would say the one highlight is Clop. They're the one who does the 0-day attacks on do like supply chain
This is for
attacks.
breaches, by the way. People like organizations that got breached, and in this case, it was a few by the Klopp group,
Yeah,
right?
they listed about 250 in Q1. That was based on Clio's managed file transfer service. So they're really big on 0 days. And I think Mark asked me a question a few podcasts ago about ransomware, and he's like, "What group keeps you up at night?" And none really, but I would say Clop is like the most scary one because they do the attacks
Yeah.
that are 0 days, and they're big on that. So
And I mean, Rackspace and some of the people that were those 250 are pretty big companies. So they seem to get some decent numbers and get some big victims.
yeah,
Cool. I think we're running short on time. I didn't want to speed you up, but I want to make sure that our audience gets an hour-ish podcast.
yeah.
Final protection tips, by the way. I mean, we've talked about a lot of it. I really the only protection tip is defense in depth. There's no one defense that's going to be a silver bullet for all of this stuff. You need endpoint, network, and identity security. You need a good policy. You need good security awareness, and you need a good security culture. But I will say some of the highlights from this report. Machine learning adoption or AI adoption is critical. To really threat actors are starting to leverage AI to scale their attacks. Malware evasion, things like packing encrypting has already been automated so that there's servers that can send new variants of the same malware to every single victim. So there's a new hash for everyone. So having your security controls leverage AI to more proactively catch stuff, as well as behavioral analysis and other things. It doesn't matter if it's AI in your network AV connection, if it's AI in network detection and response for catching network anomalies, or if it's just like AI that helps with natural human queries to try to talk to something that like to help in threat hunting. Find security solutions like WatchGuard that leverage it. In the network section, we saw a lot of malicious attachments like the zip files, but there was also PDFs, executables, some link files, etc. There's a lot of basic email security controls that will just block files that you shouldn't get in email. Like who is sending an ISO file or an executable file or a .js file or a shortcut? Like these are files that people don't email to each other. You can't really block Word documents or Office files because people do use those. But if you're not just stripping every executable file that arrives in email, you're doing something wrong, in my opinion. And for zip files, you better have some email security solutions that will unpack the zip, that will uncompress it and look at the contents. And if there's an ISO file within that zip, you may want to consider just stripping the ISO file unless it's checked. So make sure to use email security tools that can give you control over what attachments you look at, and that you even let your users receive. But make sure you also do things like uncompress zip files so that anti-malware solutions like ours at a network level can scan them. By the way, we do that at WatchGuard. We can go through many zip compressions and then run all three of our AV services against the containing files within a zip. Finally, I think this showed up in both the endpoint and network section. Threat actors are targeting remote access tools. It's Ryan mentioned it as just an obvious thing. Like if you're exposing remote access, you probably have to expose it, whether it's a VPN tool, whether it's a product like PC Anywhere or VNC or a remote desktop app. You usually expose it to every address on the internet because you can never really know where your users are coming from. And that just makes it an easy avenue for threat actors to get in. So besides just one, I prefer VPN being the only thing that's remotely accessible. Even if you have individual access tools like a remote desktop or PC Anywhere, even though they say they have their own encryption and stuff, I still recommend you make people VPN before they access them, just to have an additional bit of user control and security on top of it. And then you can focus on just hardening your VPN. You're going to have to expose your VPN to the world, but add MFA to it so people can only log in if they have MFA. And you can even make sure to patch your VPN apps because they can have vulnerabilities too. So secure remote access. But with that said, sorry, I'm going quickly, but thank you for diving into more detail in the threat section, Ryan.
No
Really
problem.
appreciated having you as a guest.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Sorry, I'm going fast. We're already at time. I think if I just do the intro and outro, we're good. We can get the screen off now. Let me find where sorry, I have Mark's. I don't have Mark's intro memorized, so I wrote it down somewhere.
You're good. I was gonna talk about a protection tip about that we saw the network attacks were a lot of like user related errors and old vulnerabilities. I was just gonna say
Do you want to pause? I as long as
no, I was
I
just
have a
gonna
little time, but we can add it. We might be able to get it back in editing if we give the. If I can just ask the question, do you have any tips, Ryan, to add to that? And you can add it, and Justin can maybe splice it before I close.
Sure.
Cool. Then let's just do that real quick. Let me get back to the screen so I can see you. So those are some tips. Oh, what the fart! A window popped up.
Classic.
So those are some quick protection tips we had. Oh, so those are some quick protection tips we had in the report. But do you have anything to add, Ryan, to those tips?
So yeah, the malicious attachments usually, I mean, you can't stop Office and Excel and all those stuff, like you said, but usually the malicious ones are embedded with macros, like Visual Basic macros. So if you see those, that's usually a red flag. It's not always. I've seen a lot analyzed in my own queue that were not malicious, but that's usually a red flag that there's probably something going on. And the second one was
before you get to the second one,
yeah.
I would add to that now, not just seeing the macro pop up. Do you want to allow macros? But
Yep.
do you want to allow active content? Like a new one we see popping up is anytime a Word document or Excel asks you for a macro or any sort of active I think they call it active content. Those pop-ups are a pause point.
Yep.
Like you say, if you know for sure it's an internal document from, say, your accounting team, they do unfortunately use macros legitimately, so you're not always sure. But I agree with you. If you're getting a Word document or an Excel document asking you for additional privileges before you run it, whether it's macros or anything else, it's a pausing point. What was your second one?
On our network attacks, the top 10, there were a lot of the attacks were like user-based errors or old vulnerabilities. I was going to say, like most people say, patch your systems. Of course you need to patch your systems, right? But part of that is about knowing what you have to patch. So have a good like asset management and know what machines you have and servers you have. And that should be like a baseline, because then you can start protecting it. If you don't know what you're protecting. Yikes.
That needs to be automated, and usually you should have a system that's doing vulnerability scans against your known assets on a regular basis, so it's telling you the patches you need before you even get to seeing the exploits. Absolutely agree. Great tips, Ryan.
Yep, that's all I got.
Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you have any questions on today's topics or suggestions for future episode topics, you can reach out to us on Blue Sky. I am at secadept.bsky.social, and Mark is at itsmark.me. We're both also on Instagram at WatchGuard_technologies. Where, by the way, where can they find you, Ryan?
I don't really use social media.
That's
I
cool.
use I use Twitter for ransomware stuff because they live on there, but that's about it.
He's a real security researcher, so he has personal OPSEC and privacy, which is smart. But if you want to have questions for Ryan, reach out to me and Mark, and we'll get them to him. In any case, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.